what if the most devastating war in human history had nothing to do with a stolen woman? What if Helen was never the reason? What if Paris was just a piece on a board, moved by a goddess who had been publicly humiliated, stripped of her dignity in front of all of Olympus, and had spent years quietly planning exactly how she was going to make them pay for it? Because that's the story they banned. Not the love affair, not the golden apple. The version where Aphrodite isn't a background character in someone else's war, but the architect of the whole thing. The version where the goddess of love turns out to be the most dangerous political mind on Olympus. Some city-states refused to tell it. Priests rewrote it. And the sanitized version is the one that survived into your history books. So let's go back to the real one. She didn't come from a womb. Aphrodite rose from sea foam off the coast of Cyprus, born from the severed flesh of Uranus after his son Cronus castrated him and threw the remains into the ocean. No mother, no childhood, no gradual entry into Olympus politics. She arrived fully formed, and the gods immediately understood the problem she represented. An unbound Aphrodite, loyal to no one, capable of bending the desire of any god or mortal she fixed her attention on. That was not something Zeus could allow to exist freely. So he did what rulers do when they encounter power they can't directly control. He handed her to someone safe. Hephaestus, god of the forge. Lame, scarred, perpetually covered in soot, while the other gods drank in golden light. Zeus didn't choose him out of affection. He chose him because Hephaestus would be grateful. Too grateful to ask uncomfortable questions, too aware of his own position to challenge the arrangement. Aphrodite had no say. She was new to Olympus. She didn't yet know how to refuse. This was not a marriage. It was a cage with a wedding attached to it. And Hephaestus, he wasn't blind to what it was. He knew Aphrodite didn't love him, knew she never would. Most men, confronted with that truth, either accept it or walk away from it. Hephaestus built a trap. When he found out about her affair with Ares, violent, beautiful Ares, everything Hephaestus wasn't, he didn't rage, didn't threaten. He went to his forge and he worked. He constructed a net of bronze so fine it was completely invisible, draped it over the bed, and waited. When Ares came to Aphrodite in the dark, when the two of them lay down together, Hephaestus triggered it. The net snapped shut. And then Hephaestus did something that had nothing to do with justice and everything to do with cruelty. He sent word to Olympus. Come and look. Come and see the goddess of love trapped, naked, powerless. Apollo came. Hermes came. Poseidon came. They laughed, made jokes, turned it into entertainment. The goddesses stayed away. Hera didn't come. Athena didn't come. Ancient sources suggest they knew exactly what they were witnessing. Not justice, but the deliberate destruction of another woman's dignity, and refused to be part of it. But the gods came, and they laughed. That moment is where this story actually begins. Not at Troy, not with the golden apple. Right there, in that room, with that net, with every god on Olympus treating her humiliation like a spectacle. Aphrodite remembered every face that laughed. Hephaestus eventually released her. Poseidon pressured him, found the whole display distasteful, or perhaps just inconvenient. Aphrodite left, and she didn't become smaller. She went to Cyprus, to her temples, and she started building something that the gods, in their arrogance, completely failed to notice until it was far too late to dismantle. The temples of Aphrodite, particularly in Corinth, have been one of the most deliberately misrepresented institutions in Greek history. Later writers described the temple at Acro-Corinth as housing hundreds of sacred attendants. Scholars argued about the numbers. What nobody argues about is what those temples actually were: centers of information. Because desire makes people talk. It always has. Kings confess things in private that they'd never say in courts. Generals relax in ways they never would on a battlefield. Philosophers who spend their days building arguments from cold logic become surprisingly honest in the right kind of warmth. The women who served in Aphrodite's temples were not decoration. They were trained, observant, and the intelligence that moved through those temple walls flowed directly back to a goddess who had very specific ideas about how to use it. This is the part that got suppressed. Not Aphrodite's affairs, not her relationships. This, the specific understanding that she was running a network, that she had built from her temples something that looked like worship, but functioned like power. That Zeus himself knew it was happening and had no clean way to stop it without triggering a confrontation he wasn't certain he'd survive politically. She had made herself untouchable, not through strength, not through force, through information and patience, and the one thing her enemies always underestimated about her: she was willing to wait. The judgment of Paris. 3 goddesses, 1 golden apple. A shepherd prince on a mountain asked to decide who among them was fairest. That's the version they teach. Here's what that version is hiding. Aphrodite didn't enter that contest to win a beauty competition. She entered it because she had found her move. The long game she'd been building since the day Hephaestus summoned Olympus to laugh at her. It had finally arrived at its moment. Look at what each goddess offered Paris. Hera offered dominion, the greatest kingdom in the world, power over men and nations. Athena offered mastery in battle, to be undefeatable, unstoppable on any field. Aphrodite offered him Helen, a married woman, the wife of a Spartan king. On the surface, this looks reckless. A goddess casually handing over another man's wife to win a contest. But Aphrodite knew exactly what she was handing him. She knew what Menelaus would do when Paris sailed home with Helen. She knew what Agamemnon would do. She knew what 1,000 Greek ships pointed at Troy would mean for the next 10 years. She knew Hera would take the Greek side. She knew Athena would take the Greek side. 2 goddesses she had just publicly defeated, publicly humiliated in front of a mortal shepherd on a mountain. They would pour every drop of their divine power into burning Troy to the ground. And Aphrodite? She officially supported Troy, but every time Paris should have died, and he should have died many times, she intervened, wrapped him in divine mist, carried him off the battlefield, kept him breathing just long enough to keep the war running. She wasn't protecting Paris because she loved him. She was protecting her peace on the board. Because the longer this war ran, the more Hera spent herself, the more Athena bled her credibility into an inconclusive decade of slaughter. The more Zeus looked impotent, unable to control a conflict he'd allowed to spiral out of his hands. Every god who had stood in that room and laughed was now exhausted, diminished, entangled in a catastrophe none of them fully understood. Troy was not the target. Troy was the battlefield she chose. When the city finally fell, Aphrodite lost Paris. Her peace was gone, but the war had already done what she needed it to do. Hera was spent. Athena was spent. Zeus had been made to look weak in front of both gods and mortals. And Aphrodite stood in Cyprus, in her temples, surrounded by her networks, her power completely intact. She hadn't taken a single serious wound. The gods who laughed at her in that net were now lesser than they had been. She was not. So why did certain city-states move to suppress this version of events? Simple. Because it's dangerous. A story where Aphrodite is a passive love goddess who occasionally meddles in human affairs. That's safe. That's manageable. That's a goddess the priests of Zeus and Ares and the masculine divine order of Olympus can fit into a structure that keeps them at the top. But a story where Aphrodite is the most strategically dangerous mind on the mountain, one who used her humiliation as fuel, built an intelligence network from her temples, and engineered the most destructive war in Mediterranean history as a decade-long act of personal retribution. That story doesn't serve power. That story threatens it. Sparta suppressed the version where Aphrodite orchestrates Helen's departure. In the Spartan telling, Helen goes willingly. Paris is simply the villain, and the war is clean. A matter of stolen honor demanding military response. Aphrodite becomes incidental. Athens, under the weight of Athena's influence, preferred versions that centered Greek strategic brilliance and pushed Aphrodite to the margins entirely. In Corinth, where her temples held real power, the fuller story survived the longest. And Corinth is exactly where later political and religious reformers applied the most pressure to dismantle her worship. They weren't threatened by a love goddess. They were threatened by the truth of what she actually was.